Hi, this is Ashish from developerhut.net and welcome to the first session of Into the Spring series, which is how to implement the Spring cache. So let us first understand what exactly the cache is, right? So cache is basically some temporary location from where you can move the data bit faster, right? So for example, let's say if your application is getting some data from the database by using the select query, right, and if that particular data is not frequently getting updated, then there is no point you get those data again and again. So what we can do in that case is we will get this data first time, we put that data into the cache, and we will use that cache to get that data again and again from the application instead of connecting to the database again and again. This will definitely improves the performance of your application, as application is not going to connect to the database again and again, right? So there is no database connectivity call happen, there is no select statement happen, right? So this is basically the cache is. Now Spring provides the internal cache mechanism to store some data into the memory location, right? Now let us first understand this problem statement, and then we will proceed ahead on how to implement the Spring cache. So now let's first understand how exactly the application is. So I have created a very simple Spring Boot application which contains certain dependencies. The first is the data JPA dependencies, so that I can get the data from the databases. Another is I have added the web dependencies, as I have created the REST controller to get all those data from the database onto the JSON format. And third is I have added the MySQL dependencies, as I am using the MySQL database. Now in the application.properties file, I have added the database connection related details. I have marked the show SQL properties as a true, so that whatever the query built by the JPA framework and fired on that particular database will be printed on the console. Okay, and I have also marked format SQL property as a true, so that whatever the query is printed on that particular console should be in a formatted manner. Then I have a very simple department table which contain the 4 columns, right? The first is the ID column, which is of type integer and it is a primary key. The same, I have the name, description and the status of the department. On top of this, I have created the department repository interface, which extends the JPA repository, where department is my actual model and integer is the primary key. Then we have a department service class, where I have auto-wired the department repository interface. Then I have created the 2 methods. The first is a get all, where I am getting all the data from the database of the department table. Then I have created the find by ID method, where I will be passing the department ID and getting that particular department details. Then last is the controller class, where I have created very simple REST controller and I have auto-wired the department service class, right? And I have created the 2 APIs. The first is find all API, right, where I'll be getting all the details of the department table by calling service.getAll methods, and another is a find by ID, where I'll be passing ID as a variable, path variable, and getting the data from the database. Now let's run this application. Now I have started the application, which is started on a port 8080. Now we will simply go and call our APIs. So I will simply go to the browser and find all API, right? Now here, when you call the find all API, you will get the list of all the departments right here. Now let's execute the another API. So I will say find, and I will add the department ID, and when I press enter, I will get the sales department details, right? Now if you go to the console, you can see that the query is getting printed now, right? So here I have marked show SQL property as a true, so query is getting printed with the formatted manner as format SQL is also true. Now if I clear the console, go to the browser again and change the department. Let's say I will say the finance department, right? So I will here go and add the 103, press enter, and I will of course get the finance department details. And here if you go to the console, you can see that again the select query is getting fired, right? As every time if you fire a API with a different ID, application will go to the database and get those details and print it on the browser or as a JSON format. So this is basically the application is. So basically if you see over here, we have created a simple REST controller, REST APIs, which will call the service and get the data from the database. So now let's say if you want to use the cache in a Spring, there are very simple two steps that you need to do. The first thing is you need to tell the Spring that you have to use the cache, okay, and for that we have to use the enable caching annotation. Okay, so let's first add this annotation. So you can add this annotation anywhere, however that has to be invoked during the start of the application. So whenever you are starting the application, that class has to be invoked. So I will create a new class. I will say cache config, right? I will put it in another package. I will say config package, right? And I will say click finish. Then in the cache config class, I will add the annotation @enable caching. Okay, so enable caching annotation we need to add. And if you want to run this class during the startup, you also have to add one more important annotation, which is @configuration. So I will say @configuration. Okay, let's import it. Okay, so now your application is enabled for the caching. Okay, now next thing is you have to tell to the Spring that what exactly you want to cache. Okay, and the best place to add all your objects into the cache is your service, from where you are calling your database or repository classes, right? So I will simply go to the service class. Okay, and here if you see we have a find by id method. Okay, I will just comment this out and I will say public. I just copy this, I will add it over here, and need to add here the next annotation, which is @cacheable. Okay, so I will say cacheable. Okay, so cacheable annotation. Okay, and then you need to tell that what is a value. Okay, so I will say value is equal to, I will say department cache. This is department cache, and you also need to add one more attribute here, which is nothing but the key. Okay, so this will take the Spring expression, so you have to use the hash and it will be the department ID, DEPT ID. Okay, so make sure that you have to understand that the caching works only on the unique objects. Okay, so that's why you have to pass the key. You need to tell to the Spring caching framework that you have to use this key for that particular object. So whatever the object written by this particular repository, that object will be added to the cache with this particular ID. So this will be a key value pair. So the Spring cache will definitely use the key value pair, right? So every time whenever you add anything into the cache, you have to provide one key and that particular object. Okay, so that's why we have added the department ID as a key, and optionally we have provided the name for this cache, which is the department cache. So whenever we invoke this particular method, so first time we will go to the database. Okay, it will go to the database, it will get that object, it will add it into the cache, and then it respond back. Okay, next time when the same ID is called, it will, instead of going to the database, it will simply get that object from the cache and return it back. So now let's run this application. So our application is started. Let's go to the browser and we have a find all method. So let's use the 102 first, Okay, so I will just go to this and I will say 102. Okay, so whenever I hit this particular API with 102, so what happened, we Spring will go to the database, okay, and it fetch the this details of this particular department, okay, add it into a cache, okay, and then return it back. Okay, so we have a result of 102. Now again let's hit this, so I will go to the another tab, I will say 102 and I will press enter. Okay, so here if you see this carefully, this time we got result bit faster. And that if you go to the workspace, or if you go to your console, you can see that query is not fired this time, right? So let's say I clear the console, I go to the browser, I refresh this again, call is going to happen, right? And if you go to the console, no query is getting fired, right? So this is the beauty of cacheable, right? So you are caching this particular department, and instead of going to the database, you will just return it from the cache itself. So let's say if you used another ID this time which is not in the cache, it will again go to the database, okay, and it will add it in the cache. So let's say now my 103, which is the finance department, is now added to the cache. The first time it will execute the query, however next time it won't execute the query. So I will say this time, right? So result is bit faster, and if you see, the only one query was fired, which was the earlier query, right? So this is how we enable the Spring Cache. Okay, okay, now let's say you don't want to even go to the database for the first time, right? So what we can do in that case, we can load all the objects from the database into the cache first at the start of the application, and then we can use that particular cache. So this is very simple trick that most of the developer perform to load the cache with at the start of the application itself, right? So let's try with that. So how we can achieve it? So I will go to the cache config. Okay, so I will simply first I will auto wire the cache manager. Okay, so I will say auto wire. Okay, and I will say cache manager. Okay, so cache manager will be definitely required, which is from org spring framework cache, right? I will say cache manager. Okay, I will make it private as a good programming practice, and I will create a very simple method, okay, where I will use this cache manager, okay, to load all the caches. Okay, so let's create a method. So I will say public, I will say void, I will say preload cache. Okay, so this is the method I have created. Okay, and I will say cache manager, sorry, let's say cache manager dot get cache. Okay, and I need to pass of course the name. Okay, so I will say this time I will use the different name, so I will say application cache. Okay, and this will give me the object of cache. Okay, so I will just store it to the local variable, which is a cache. Okay, now we have the object of the cache, and now we will put all the department objects into this cache. Okay, so how we can do this? So let's auto-wire our service over here. So I will say @auto-add, and I will say department service. Okay, so I will say department service, okay, and oops, it's auto-wired. Okay, and let's get all the objects. Okay, so I will say department service dot get all. Okay, so this is why I have added this method, and let's store into the local variable, which is a list. Okay, and I will say here department list. Okay, now let's iterate this list. So I will say department list, I will say for. Okay, for each we'll use the for each. So I have the department and just put everything into the cache. Okay, so I will say cache dot put. Okay, what will be my key? Of course my key will be department dot id, right? So department dot get id comma the object. Okay, so which is department over here, right? So now this is what this will do. It will now what this will do, it will add all the departments into the cache itself. Okay, I will simply add one sysout over here, so that we can find it out. Okay, so initializing cache. Okay, and to run this method during the start, what we need to do, we want to run this method, right? So we need to add one annotation which is at the rate post construct, right? So we'll say post construct. Okay, and we will see this whether this particular trace is coming on a console or not. Okay, now the next thing that we need to do over here is we need to use this cache. Okay, so whenever we get the object of department, we have to use this cache instead. Okay, so let's go to the service. Okay, and I will simply just comment this out. Okay, and I will just copy this one again. Okay, and I will go to the cache config, application cache we will require, and just pass the value the application cache. Okay, so now let's try to run this application and execute this API. So now application is started and you can see that we got our trace, right? So at the time of application startup, this methods run automatically, right? Where we get the cache object, we will get all the objects from the database, all the department objects, and load into the cache. Okay, now if you see over here, we also have the select query for get all, right? Now when I call, let's try to call the API. So if we go and I will just, let's say 104. Okay, and if I press enter, so this time it shouldn't go to the database, it should directly fetch it from the cache. Okay, so we got all the data. Now if we go to here, you can see that, right, there is no query, right? So no query is fired, right? No select query for 104. Let me clear the console again. Okay, and we'll go here, and this time I will say 105. Okay, and we got the details for 105. Okay, which is the development department, and if we go to the console, no query is being fired. Okay, so this is how we can preload the cache. Okay, so we have now cache in place and all the objects are in the cache and we're retrieving data from the cache. Now let's say if you have a case where you want to clear the cache and reloads it again. Okay, so how we can do that? So we have a very simple annotation for that, which is cache evict. Okay, so we will use this annotation and we will clear the cache this time. Okay, so let's see. So for that, what we need to do is we just need to go to our department service, right, where we have used the cacheable annotation, right, and we just need to use the cache evict annotation on another method. Okay, so now let me copy this, and here I will just remove this. I will change the method as well. I will say clear cache, clear all cache. Okay, this method doesn't take anything. Okay, so I will just remove this, and it will not return anything, so it will be void, right? And then we'll remove the return statement as well. Okay, and here we will say cache evict. Okay, let's import this annotation. Okay, so I have imported the cache evict. So if you see here, we have Spring Framework cache annotation cache evict. Okay, now let's add one sysout statement so that we know that whether this method is called or not. Okay, so I will just add a simple sysout and I will say all cache evicted. Okay, and here we also need to pass some parameters over here, right? the first thing that we need to do is we need to of course add our value, right, which will take the name of the cache, right. So I want to clear the application cache, right. So as in our preload cache we are adding this all the data into this cache, right. Next is we need to tell whether you want to remove all entries or not. Okay, so there is a all entry parameter which you can mark it as a true. Okay, so what all entries means, it will remove all the entries from this cache, and next time whenever you call the find by id, everything will be from the database for the first time, and then it will reloads, start putting into the cache again and again. Okay, so this is what will happen. Now let's make a provision to call this method. Okay, so I will go to the controller, okay, and I will create one API who is going to call this method. Okay, so I will go here and I will say department, and I will say evict clear all cache. Okay, I will create one REST API which is not taking anything. Okay, and I will simply change the name of the method as well. Okay, this method is, let's say I will say it will return a string, and I will say uh, data cleared from cache. Okay, and of course we need to call the that method which is clear all cache. So I will say service dot. Okay, so now our application is started. Now you can see the cache is initialized and all data into the cache. Now let's go to browser and let's try to get one department object, let's say 104. So this time it will get it from the cache because my cache is already loaded, right. So there won't be any select statement on the console, right. So let's go here. So we got a sales data, right, and there is no select query, right. And I will just change the data again, and we got the now finance department data, and if you go, no select statement. So everything is coming from cache now, right. Now let's call this API which is slash department slash clear cache. So I will just duplicate this tab. Okay, and here I will say department slash clear cache. So what it will do, it will clear the entire cache. So it is saying data cleared from cache, right. And let's go here, and our method is also called, so all cache evicted, right. Now let's try to fetch something from department. So 103, I will just refresh this, and this time it takes some time, and if we go, the select statement is fired, right. So it is not taken from the cache, right. Now if I fire this again, right, so this time if you go to here, right, so only one select statement. So now my cache was cleared completely, right, and there is one object now which is again added to the cache, which is 103, right, the finance department data. Rest also the same, right. So if I call 104 again, it will first time it will go to the database, right, and next time it will be coming from the cache. So it will start reloading the cache or refilling the cache again and again. Okay, so this is a one way where you can clear all the cache and reloads it again and again. Another way is you can clear the cache, and while after once you clear the cache, you can reload the cache again, like the same way what we have did in preload cache. Okay, so this is related to the cache evict annotation. So till now we have cleared all the data from the cache. Now let's say if you want to only remove a particular ID from the cache, even that is also possible in case of the Spring Cache. Now let's see how we can achieve that. So for that we will be using the same annotation cache evict, right. Instead of all entries we will be using the key, right. So simply copy this method. Okay, so I will say clear data from cache. Okay, and I will say I will simply say @cache evict, and I will still require the application cache because we are removing data from the application cache, right? And here, instead of all entries, I will simply say key. So I'll say key, and I will just pass the department ID. Okay, so of course with the hash. Okay, this basically should not return anything, so I will say void. I will remove the statement, and I will just add once this out, and I will just copy this, and I will change the message data evicted from cache. Okay, so I will just print the department ID, right? So now we are ready with our cache evict. Now we just need to call this, right? So I will go to the controller, okay, and I will say I will create one more API which will help me to clear the data from the cache, right? So I will say clear data from the cache, right? And I will say clear data from the cache slash I will say ID. I need to pass the ID in the path variable so that we know that what data we need to clear, right? So I take the ID as a parameter, and I will just call the method, so clear data from the cache, which is department ID. Okay, and I will say data cleared, or I will simply say ID plus cleared from the cache. Okay, so now let's test this. So I will just run the application. So application is started, right, and we have the data, right? So everything is as of now is coming from the cache. So I will here say I will just get the 103 from the cache. So if you go to the application, you don't see any select statement. This was the select statement for find all, right? And as of now, let's try to remove this 103 from the cache. So I will just simply clear the cache, right? So let's call our URL. Okay, so I will say clear data from the cache with the 103. Okay, so when I enter this, we should get our message that 103 is cleared from the cache, and if we go to the console, we'll say we are getting data evicted from the cache. Now let's try to find this object again, and let's see if it is getting from database or not. So now we got the JSON data. Now let's go to the console, and yeah, you can see, so basically data is coming from the database, right, and it's stored into the cache. Now let's say if I execute this again, next time it will be from the cache itself. Okay, so if we go to the console, okay, only one time query fired. So if I just clear it, and if I do this again, so no database query fired. Okay, so this is how you can simply clear the cache, okay, using cache evict annotation. So by now we have used the cache evict annotation to clear the cache. Either we will clear all the objects from the cache or particular objects of the cache. However, if you see, we used the controller for this to call the service method, right? So every time we have to create one new API, and we have to call that method, which is a clear data from the cache or clear all the cache. If you want to clear the cache after a particular period of time, so application will only take care of itself, so that can also be possible. However, we will see the another method to clear the cache without the annotation. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to add the enable scheduling annotation, so that we can schedule some method to execute at particular period of time. Okay, so let's say I will add the enable scheduling annotation. So I will say enable scheduling. So this will help me to enable the scheduler in the Spring application, same as enable caching, right? Now I will add one method. I will say public void, I will say clear cache. Okay, and here I will just add one sysout. I will just copy this. I will say sysout, and I will say clearing the cache. Okay, now there is a simple way to remove the all the cache. So let's say if you have a multiple cache available in your application, and you want to clear all those cache from all those created different cache, like a department cache or application cache, right? So what we will do is we have a cache manager, right? So we'll use the cache manager dot, we'll say get cache names, okay, which will return the collection. Okay, we will convert it to streams. So I will say parallel streams. Okay, and we will use the for each. Okay, now this parallel stream for each returns the name of the cache. Okay, so I will use a lambda expression over here. So I will just, yeah, so I will just say here, I will say name, the arrow operator, and I will say cache manager, whatever the name that I have. What operation I want to do is I have to get that particular cache, get cache of a name. Okay, and once I get that cache, I will just call the clear method. Okay, and I don't need the semicolon. Okay, now so we have a method who will clear the cache. Okay, now we just need to call this method at particular period of time, right? So what I will do is we need to use one annotation which is @scheduled. Okay, so I will say scheduled annotation. Okay, and you have to add the rate. So I will say fixed rate. So at what rate you want to run this? So I will say at the rate of 15 seconds. Okay, it is in milliseconds. Okay, and I will say I will just add initial delay as well. So initial delay is also of 15 seconds. Okay, so what does this mean is, so this method will call every 15 seconds, and once application is started it will take a 15 seconds also, so that we will get sufficient time to test whether we are getting objects from the cache or not, and then we will test whether cache is cleared or not. Okay, now let's start the application. So application is started. Now I will just go here and get the 104, which is sales, and if you go, there is no query fired, so everything is from cache. Now after 15 seconds my cache will be cleared. Okay, so this method will be called. Okay, so we got the trace, so clearing the cache. Now let's try to fire the same API. So I will go here and I will refresh, and let's go to the console, and you can see that cache is cleared. So now it is taking it from the database. So every 15 seconds it will clear the cache. So in your case it will be maybe once in a day, in the night or something like that. Okay, so this will help you to clear the cache without manual intervention. Okay, so this is how we can clear the cache without cache evict annotation. I hope you understood this. So I hope you understand how to implement the Spring Cache using all these annotations. So all the code which I demonstrated in this session is available on my GitHub repository, and you can find the link in the description section of this video. If you think this information is valuable, please do like and share this video. Thanks for watching, and I see you on the next one.